It's on.
Okay. Go ahead and talk if you're going to real quick. Test it for me.
Test, 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 test,
Okay.
test.
That's it. Yeah.
That's it?
I had to turn it down a little bit. Yes.
Okay,
it
so
should be
people
good
can
now.
hear it.
Yes, in the back.
Okay, good. Okay, cool.
If it ever starts to ring like that again, or you notice it, you can just turn it off real quick, and they'll fix it immediately. Okay.
Okay, so not duck and cover.
Exactly. Do not freak out. You're all good.
Do not break out into sweat. Okay.
But no QR code. I had to type in the web address.
I'm sorry. They're not safe.
Welcome and good afternoon and happy Friday. Thanks for being here on this multi-colloquium of the semester. It is sure to be a great one. Dr. Birkenkrahe is finishing up his 4th year here at Lyon College, and I think it's safe to say that nobody hit the ground running faster when he got here at Lyon College than Dr. Birkenkrahe. He's made an impact all 4 years, and we're looking forward to lots more years of having him here with us. Before I turn it over to him, I want to remind you all that we have the last Highland House social of the year right after this. So hang around, have a cookie at the end. Get a cookie now if you want to. Have some lemonade. Hang around at the end, talk to Dr. Birkenkrahe, and then head over to the Highland House for the social. Dr. Birkenkrahe, take it away. Thank you.
At the back as well, yeah? Cool. So a student I just took a leak before the talk, the pre-presentation, Lou, and a student asked me, are you nervous? So it implies that I'm human, which is great. All the professors will be pleased to hear that. Now, give you a few more minutes to look at that while I prepare. I know I'm in America now, so I should start with a joke, right? But the problem is Germans are not funny. And we're not supposed to be. We're supposed to be exact on time, maybe scary, right? Something like that. So in Germany, I might start the talk with a threat instead, but I won't. Instead, let's have a joke, okay? This is a talk about AI. I can't believe that I'm standing here talking again about AI. It's probably not going to be the last time. And muses. So one of the origins of the word amusing, of course, is the muse. So, nothing better than thinking about if we can ask AI for good jokes. I don't know if you've tried that. So I did it and started with a tagline. So your resume says you've processed 40,000 applications in 0.3 seconds. So see what AI came up with. But how are you with processing spreadsheets? But how are you with disappointment? That's even more disappointing. I'm glad you're not laughing. I hope you're laughing at this and not with this. But have you ever waited for someone who never showed up? Super lame. But can you sit through a meeting that should have been an email? Yeah, that's funny because it's so true and sad, right? So, this did not go well, as you can see. And so I turned to a human, and when things get serious and you need a joke, do not ask AI. That's what we learned from this, and you probably already knew this. So I asked a human, asked my wife, this is my wife's doing. So your resume says you processed 40,000 applications in 0.3 seconds, but how are you with fetching coffee? That's funny. I mean, it's not super funny, it's not hilarious, it's not a thigh slapper, but she has lived with a German for many, many years, so that probably dampened the spirit. I'm sorry. Anyway, the topic, artificial intelligence, Muse or tool. I hope you can see it, tinyurl.com. Sorry, there's no QR code. QR codes, are so 1990. So tinyurlcode.com/lion-2025. I don't actually have to look there. I can look here. That's the entire lecture with speaker notes, if you like to read along or go back and find me out and stuff like that. Now, the purpose is to give you a firm place to stand on using generative AI. I don't actually know how firm it is, but it's really about giving you an idea. How can you reflect on AI? That's very different from a talk I gave a while ago. I'm going to talk about that later at the White River Hospital. And my first idea really was, teacher/scholars and residents/scholars, like in hospitals, they have an issue because they have a very hard job. In the case of hospitals, they save lives every day. But at the same time, they're supposed for their career to do publishing. How should that work? And a similar case applies to professors as well. We not save lives, but it's hard to give everything to the students and then do high quality research. I'm not complaining. I think that's actually a great setup, but it's worth thinking about. So my first idea was, use it for this target audience. And then I realized, actually, if you take the research out of out of research, everybody is searching, and it's really something for everybody, not just for scholars and people who do publications. So quick show of hands, and many people may have already done this. Who uses AI instead of Google search already? Okay, that was, of course, a trick question because there are only very few niche search engines, I think 3 or 4, that do not use AI as the search. Yeah? So Google has long used machine learning models to understand what people are typing on the line, in the search field. They do this to understand the intent of the query, rank the results by a form of semantic analysis where they try to infer what kind of temperature your question has. They use it for autocomplete, and they have done for many, many years, predating ChatGPT by years. Yeah? So you've all been using AI all the time, just nobody told you in particular. And the reason is really you didn't ask. Yeah? Who would ask? So my first topic here is what has happened in, this is basically the whole talk. So I'm going to give you a little update, what has changed in the past years, 2 years because AI is about 3 years old, the kind of AI I'm talking about, generative AI. And a year later, I gave a talk at White River, which I now wish I had published, but I didn't. The technology has moved on since then, but really not that much. What really has moved on is the way we use it. And so that's really the more interesting part. Of course, you cannot talk about use of technology without talking about the technology. So those are the two things I'd be wanting to address. We're going to look at the demand for data. I call that the data dilemma with a nod to Plato. We're going to look at AI augmentation, which is sort of integrated assistance of AI in the research process. But whenever I say research process and you're not a researcher, just think search, right? Because you have questions, you need answers, you're impatient, so you search. Then I'm going to propose, that's really the only really original result I have, which is a cognitive map. It's based on scenarios. I've been a scenario planner at Shell for many years before this career. And I find it a useful way to orient yourself in a very new situation. So I'm going to propose a cognitive map, 4 different scenarios that help to align the research process with the AI tools. And in particular with the Muse tool dichotomy of AI. I also promise I will not use many words like dichotomy, even though, or maybe perhaps this is a faculty colloquium because it is Friday afternoon and everybody deserves a break. I'm going to give a very short overview at the end about some new tools. Could give a whole talk about that, many talks really, because there are so many hundred tools really at the moment. Just selected a few categories of tools. And at the end, I'm going to give you my conclusions. Now, you have to brace yourself because the first part of the talk may sound rather negative, but I'll try to balance it towards the end as I talk about my own research, which is not AI research. Okay, so let's start with the changes. So in August 23, when it became clear that AI was not just a passing fad, I mean, that may still turn out that way, I gave a talk at White River Medical Hospital, and I have to read the title. It was, How Machine Learning Can Help Your Publishing Career. Since then, the technology has changed. We discuss shortly how it has changed, but especially the way the people have used the technology has changed. So just a few pointers here. The data here are, the first data are from the National Science Foundation, taken in, I think, April 23. So at that time, about 33% of all organizations said that they had adopted AI. This, of course, is a survey, so it's not all organizations everywhere in the world, but it's supposedly a good sample because they really wanted to find out what's going on. At that time, the general purpose tools were dominating. And this is really means that people had no idea what to do with it, so they were trying everything. Yeah? And if people don't know what they want to do, the people who produce the tools don't know what to give them. And that's why these tools were very general purpose. That doesn't mean that most of you may not still use AI for general purpose, but if you have a specific purpose, such as research or something else, maybe even research in a particular area, or I don't know, you're running a parish or anything really, or you're building a language program, you might need specialized tools. They exist now. There were also reports back then, and this is pretty high number, 25% productivity increase. So that means, if that increases, you don't have to go to work at all anymore. There were first reports about bias, accuracy, misuse, especially of AI. They were voiced then, and people have been talking about it. And the specialized tools at the time were very limited. One tool that the biologists and chemists probably know is AlphaFold. Came out a few years before ChatGPT, about 2018. The guy who invented it, co-invented it, Dennis Hassabis, just got on Time magazine and got the Nobel Prize for his discovery. And he has just said, in fact, the last few days, he has asserted us, alongside of the Bill Gates quote that you saw in the survey, that an artificial general intelligence, basically a super brain, is in immediate reach. So those were the feelings in 23. And in 25, there's also a very recent research compounded from Capgemini, McKinsey research. Now 75% of the organizations confess to using AI. The research-heavy organizations, like in pharmaceuticals, technology, and so, are leading the pack. So if I go to any organization around Batesville or so, I would expect people, I've just talked to Jacob, people to use it, but maybe not organizations in an organizational way. That's something we're still not quite there yet. Now it gets better. 58% of organizations, according to these data, report exponential benefits. So it's not only don't we have to go to work anymore, we're going to get holiday, extra holiday by AI. That's if this trend continues. I put this in quotes because one of the things I'm obviously going to say is that there's a lot of hype still around this. Now, this is quite remarkable and reminds me of another time in my life, namely the web, creation of the web, where the hype goes to a certain level that people say it cannot possibly go higher. But, don't hold your breath. Governance and guidelines emerge at this stage. So at Lyon College, we have just, not adopted yet, but proposed a set of AI guidelines, very timely, right on top of the trend. And there's more to be said about this. Especially maybe one word about the benefits, right? I've worked in many companies, and those who have, maybe even at Lyon, know that benefits analysis usually sells a particular point, and very shortly after the point's been sold, the benefits analysis, at least in parts, has to be retracted because errors were made and people were too enthusiastic, and especially when a new technology is being imported. Yeah? So that's a very common thing in organizations. The other thing which is important about the tools is that now we have multimodal models. What does that mean? And what that means is that the models can now digest any form of media, audio, video, anything. You basically don't have to tell the model anymore or find a separate model in order to do these things, at least to a reasonable degree of accuracy. This is very recent that ChatGPT came out with a marked increase in their ability to create images. All those images are new images created in the last couple of days from ChatGPT. Not without pain, but with a lot less pain than 2 years ago when I started creating these images. Now, interestingly, when people hear multimodal, multimedia, what they think is, oh, now these models are as smart as we are. You know, I look at a picture, I look at you, I get things just from looking at you. That's obviously because there's visual information and I work through that visual information. So are these models no longer language models? But that's not true, they still are. So what they do is they construct language based on the image. They have to filter everything through natural language in order to arrive at the answer to their prompt. Yeah? The implications of that are very severe. You know, to begin with, they're not like humans at all. Yeah? Because when you see something, you do not in your mind first translate it into language until you have a visceral response or any response whatsoever. Yeah? So we could talk a lot more about that. It's very interesting how these constructions are created. Now, the main point being that in 2025, generative AI is still basically the same beast it always was. It doesn't understand you at all. It doesn't understand you at all. It's a machine that understands nothing and works like a pattern matching engine that predicts the next most likely token based on patterns it has learned in a training phase. Yeah? You probably all know that. So they also have no understanding of the physical world in particular. They have no understanding of social context. They have no understanding of internal models. So for example, when I say, no, it's not a glass, but the glass is half full, that's an internal model that I apply to a situation that I can now spin into a metaphor, a poem, into a whole lecture about, you know, the difference between the glass being half full or half empty. That's fascinating, right? Humans find that fascinating. And we are totally capable of doing that. Even if you're not capable of spinning it in any direction, you immediately are taken by the image. Yeah? So a human would infer meaning way beyond the words based on something like this. A machine cannot do that at all. Now, another thing here which you may have read through is usually. What words usually come next? And this is an area in which AI has improved quite a bit. Namely, usually means that the AI uses context in order to get its response, to guess, to give you the next word to your question. And in terms of the context building, there have been great advances. So at the moment, even normal models can digest up to 100,000 tokens. A token is not a coin, it's a fragment of language. Yeah, it could be a word, it could be a symbol, something like that. But as long as you can write it in language, 100,000 of those at one time, the model can take. But what can it do with it? Nothing but build some context. It cannot add it to its training, which would be a way of kind of adding it to its working brain. Yeah? It can only use it to build context in which to answer your question. And so that's very different. So what that means is that if your prompt is vague or contradictory, the context will not save you. Yeah, that's really important to know, because our idea is, you know, if anybody is, you know, has a problem with understanding and I give them more information and they ask back and I give them more information, the assumption is the understanding will increase, you know, unless they are resilient or hate you, you know, which is something else the models can do, but they can pretend to do it really well. Now, at this point you might ask, what about web search? You know, with all these additional little buttons like deep search, web search, thinking mode. My goodness, right? What about that? How does that work? And you may know it. Basically, this is another context-building exercise where the model just adds web pages to it. And this is another, if you want, another ruse, because as those people who have tried to do web scraping or, you know, taking content from the web know, web scraping is a really, really fickle business. It's really difficult. And the reason is that most web pages don't look anymore like they looked in 1995. You know, they are active, they are dynamic, there are buttons, people press buttons, there's connections to databases, all kinds of stuff happens. And it's not obvious to any program how to scrape those pages on which a lot happens. It's really obvious how to scrape a page with a table, because it doesn't move. Yeah? So lots of limitations here. Or put differently, do not trust the deep search, basically. Yeah? It's a bit like Google search, you like it, and suddenly it has autocomplete. Do you like it a lot more now? No, it's a little more comfortable. Yeah? says autocomplete. Now, what does that mean? It means that the words come easy, but they're empty. So what you see sort of in slightly more highbrow language, you see syntactic fluency, so the sentences sound glib and right with statistical mimicry without any semantic depth. I mean any, not any, right? It's not like there's a little bit of understanding. There's none. Yeah? You're basically talking, I don't know, to a bottle. There's no understanding. Yeah? How come, however, that they seem occasionally so wise? People report that, right? You ask a question and something comes back and like, wow, I haven't thought that ever, or not for many years, or I'm glad I come across this wisdom now, right? How is that possible? And the reason is, of course, that they've been trained on everything, quote unquote everything, almost everything that people have ever written. That's why. So they use lots of wise things, and they combine these patterns from their training in a very fluent language, which feels like wisdom, but it's as much as saying, if an actor recites the words of Julius Caesar in a Shakespeare play, they do not become Julius Caesar. So another problem here, there's lots of problems, and I don't want to go too deeply into it because of time, but I hope you're with me. Namely, we say these models, I've said they're not creative, they don't have understanding, they're not intelligent, but we don't know what that means. So somebody who really wants to champion the models, champion the machine, would say, you don't know what you're talking about. You can't define intelligence, you can't define creativity. It can do whatever you can do and better because you don't know what you're doing. Yeah? And of course, this isn't a conceptual weakness, but the question one might ask is like, is it worth abandoning millennia of experience with creativity and intelligence in order to suit the machine? Do we really want to give that up, even though we can't define it? We use stuff that we can't define all the time to great effect. Yeah? So, and I'm not saying this in a rhetorical question, because by suggesting these models as the one-all and end-all, that is what is being said. Now, what about thinking mode? I think I said this earlier. So is the model reasoning or not? And it is not. It's not reasoning. The same thing happens that always happens. It tries to create a prompt by basically pushing information through a neural network. It's a very large neural network, by attaching weights to individual actions and whittling the information down to a point. Yeah? Trying to use as much context as possible to pick the right answers out of many answers, all of which have probabilities. The effect of the context is that instead of picking the one with the highest probability, it may pick one with a lower probability because it fits the context better. Yeah? So it's nifty. And not only does it go once through the network, it goes back and forth trillions of times in order to generate that answer. This going back and forth and this training and retraining is one of the reasons why the models soak up so much energy. Yeah? It's not actually getting the information and putting it through once. It's this endless training and retraining that costs so much energy. So basically, we may not be able to define reason, but we know if somebody is reasoning with us or just parroting. We may not be able to explain it. But the key thing here is that if somebody is unreasonable, you do not trust them. If you're your spouse or your friend or some loved one or somebody else you need to reason, you need to listen to, you would still listen to them, but you wouldn't trust them. Being unreasonable is like removing yourself from the conversation. That's what it means. Yeah? Doesn't mean you can't get back to it, but it removes you. You look all a little downtrodden. Is this the time or is it the topic? I don't know. So let's move on a little bit faster. The data dilemma. And this is where I probably overstep my welcome. But this is a liberal arts college, so I feel borrowing from philosophy is not so bad. So many of you will have heard of Plato's allegory of the cave from almost 2,500 years ago. It's a scenario in which prisoners are in a cave. They're chained to a wall. They can only look at the opposing wall. The lights behind them, they cannot see any things, just the empty wall. But behind them, people are carrying objects, and because the light comes from the back, they see the shadows on the wall. But that's all they see. So they're all there, their entire access to reality is through the shadows. there is reality, yeah, but it's just the shadows. Now, in the allegory, one of them gets up, I don't know, can't remember how, gets up and finds the way to the light and realizes, wow, there's a world out there. And interestingly, which I cannot capitalize on here, he goes back to the prisoners and says, come on, let's go. There's a whole world out there. And they say, nah. They prefer the chained existence. Yeah, we cannot deepen that here, but of course it's very interesting. Now, computer scientists do not often think about philosophy, but I owe it to the Teagle grant and our Core 100 course from last year to be led back to Plato. So that's a very nice, was a very nice excursion. Now, the image, interestingly, that you see here shows a confabulation. So I gave the prompt Plato's Cave. The AI, of course, has lots of documents about Plato's Cave, can complete the prompt really easily, but you can see what it did. It added a typewriter to one of the prisoners. Why? Because earlier, I asked for a typewriter as a tool in another slide. And so it stores this as the context and feels like, I'm going to just use that. There are lots of images that, like, you know, I ask for a bird, I ask for a butterfly. You'll find that bird and butterfly come up, you know, in the image. And that's just an image. Just imagine that was a, you know, I don't know, there was a medical diagnosis, yeah? In the context of other medical diagnoses. That's the context, right? And now that bit of information from another medical diagnosis finds its way into your current medical diagnosis. Good or bad? I don't know. Certainly not good, yeah, and worth reviewing and worth being aware of. So what is this data prisoner's dilemma exactly? This has served many, many examples, but I'm just going to highlight a few examples from here. I mean, there are very big problems still to be solved. And it doesn't matter in which area you are. You know, maybe a soldier, I don't know, a biologist, a language person, it doesn't matter. There are big problems to be solved. But what is common to all these problems is that in order to solve them, we need to leave our specialization, right? So, but the problem is that today's researchers are even more specialized than yesterday's researchers, and even much more specialized than the one before that. Yeah? So that's not very good. And that actually, incidentally, was the premise of building the World Wide Web. The idea was, you know, not to have to work hard to get my information and carry it to everyone, but just to have a link and share the links across a vast network. And that, I have to say, in the 1990s, that seemed a really brilliant idea. It seemed like would solve all problems. So instead of basically copying every book to every reader, you just open a window to where it already exists, and they can see it. Yeah, that sounds great. Turned out to be more difficult than anticipated, and not for technical reasons, I have to say. So the World Wide Web, I would in effect, has reduced transparency and accountability and not increased it. So the reason is that the idea of the links, because it's lazy, caught on so well that the World Wide Web has effectively reduced the transparency, because you cannot you cannot make information into a currency without commoditizing it. And when you commoditize it, you take it away from the person that the information belongs to. Not in a property sense, but in the sense that, you know, when I say something to you, you may believe me or not, but you argue with me because it comes from a human. If it comes from a machine, there's very little motivation for you to do that. Yeah? So it sounds a bit, you know, you could actually say that the digital reflection of knowledge is never really knowledge, because the way we experience and define knowledge is always connected to a real human and not to a made-up human. Yeah. So sounds philosophical again, maybe, but you don't really need to be a philosopher to experience the consequences, right? And I've written them down here. You can now see and read so much more than ever before, but you understand less and less. And most importantly, you don't trust anymore what you see. Not what you see when people say it, but the digital world. Yeah? There's no trust anymore whatsoever. So it is, in a way, if I want to extend it, it's catastrophically worse than it was in 1990. But at the same time, everything seems to be so much better. That's the contradiction. In particular, the implication brings us back to Plato's cave. So you could say that if you're only digitally aware and digitally alive, you only encounter shadows of reality, right? filtered things, filtered through social media, filtered through search engines, and in some cases, institutional gatekeepers of some sort. Yeah. Now, this, of course, leaves us wide open to manipulation, but to explore that aspect would be a whole other talk and also wouldn't be my field, really. So what's to be done? Obviously, artificial intelligence to the rescue. Let's focus on what has been presented to us as a solution, large language models. And what we can do, that's the promise, is we can delegate everything to that's mundane and complex to generative AI. That's at least the promise. So the machines will unchain us. That's a tall order, and that was very clear in 23 as well when I gave my talk to the residents. And then I was also personally a lot more naive. I think in the same way in which before COVID, we're all very naive about what it means to teach digitally. I think that's a similar probably thing to compare it. So what I did is I asked the AI then in 23 what it thought, how it could support the publishing. Your publishing is the publishing of the residents at the hospital. And it came up with a list of 15 things, which I thought were good. That's good. That's good stuff. You know, it's time-ordered, actually works really well. Now, what I've added to this is a qualification in 23 where I decided if something is bright and white, you should use it. You could use it easily. If it's gray, not so much. And if it's dark, you should stay away from it. Yeah? And it would be really interesting to redo this type of assessment, but I haven't done it. Because I think at the moment it would be actually too difficult to do it because there are too many tools and there's too much confusion about it. It was easier with the simpler technology in 23. Yeah? So what's the problem? The problem is that if you want to work with a digital assistant, an AI assistant, you need trust. And the complication is that AI is full of hallucinations and confabulations. Here's another one. I asked at some point about a bird. And now a bird came up. Can you remove the bird? You can do all kinds of things. Remove this, that, and the other. To remove the hallucination is as hard as trying to get a liar to admit that they are lying. It's almost impossible. What you have to do is power the system down, bring it back up again, and make it forget. It's hard work. So this was created pretty late in the game, though. Now, you might think, maybe AI outgrows the hallucinations. I'm sure you've seen it. There are few hallucinations now. As of this week, report from OpenAI, 20th of April, they have admitted that their latest model, which have a lot more thinking, reasoning capability, are worse with hallucinations than the older models. Worse, not better. Can they explain why? No. Because they have no idea where the hallucinations come from. So the core question, I'm coming to this really too late in this talk, the core question is, can generative AI make us more efficient as searchers or researchers, especially when the resources are scarce? Because, you know, given all these impediments, if you are back to the wall, don't you reach for, you know, the one tool that somebody throws at you? Sure you would, right? Sounds like a self-defense situation. Yeah? And that's the core question. There's a sub-question, which I came up with when I started preparing the talk, which is, could AI kill the host in the process? Yeah? So one additional problem, which I cannot deepen here, is that anybody who uses AI feels super smart, because it is like walking in a giant library, and suddenly, instead of just looking at the back of the books, I can never understand this, is almost like somebody said, you go to a book and you point at it, and the AI tells you, you read that book. I know I didn't. No, you did. No, you did. And that one, that too. Yeah, so, and it goes to an entire library of thousands of volumes. How can you not conclude that you are super smart? Yeah? But actually, it might make us feel stupid. Not feel stupid, be stupid. Because it might actually contaminate and reduce the knowledge we already possess. Could give a whole talk about how that happens in my field, namely coding. And I'm sure many of you in your specialized field could give a similar story. Yeah? Okay, so at this point, and I have to, we're more than halfway through, and I have to increase the speed a little bit, which is good because then I can skip my results and you don't look too critical at them. So I'm going to increase that a little bit. My first inclination for this research, I'm not going to go into that. That's not Shakespeare, that's Sir Walter Scott, but could say a lot about it, but take it in the context of generative AI. My first inclination was to present my actual research and not the meta-research. What you see here is meta-research that was really put together in a very, very short time, shamefully so. But my real research question was this, and this is in layman's terms. So I'm curious where hallucinations come from. Could they be similar to sudden changes known from physical systems as phase transitions? An example for such a system would be water boiling. There's something magical that happens when water boils. It's fluid, it's liquid, and then temperature increases, and at a particular point, it suddenly goes gaseous. Yeah? And this is only the simplest example that everybody knows. Phase transitions are super, super interesting. So this is something that you can discuss with the AI right away and make you feel super smart. It's not actually my question. My question in its current state comes next, and you better brace yourself. I have assembled some notes about it in the speaker notes, so you can read in the speaker notes what this really is about. I don't want to go into it, but the basic idea is that neural networks, they perform a form of lossless information compression. So what I explained to you from the beginning, the prompt to the end, is like information compression supposed to be lossless because you're not supposed to lose information but gain, right? It's actually the opposite. It's almost a reversal of loss. And certain systems in physics do the same thing. And it so happens that I am a mathematical physicist, so I know some of the tools how to do this in physics. And so it seemed to me a year ago likely that you could work these tools in order to not solve the hallucination problem, but at least describe what it is. Yeah? And this is how it reads in physicist terms. So could generative hallucinations be understood as emergent phenomena analogous to spontaneous symmetry breaking, analyzable through quantum field theory renormalization group ideas, and expressible via functors in category theory, and representable as Feynman diagrams of scale-compressed information flow? That's the research question. The mathematicians will know category theory. You may understand how there is a structure invariant between those two different areas. Physicists will understand at least the Feynman diagram. Some physicists understand romanization groups. Actually turns out the idea to do this at first and then get back from it came because of Sandy, because you said, this is something I started when I was a graduate student. This is something I started when I was a graduate student. Yeah? So it would be seemed like a good idea to bring that back. But when I wrote that, I thought, no, that's not going to fly. So instead, I spent most of my spring break wrestling with the AI to try to get the research question into this form. And that was actually quite successful. And that's why I have something positive to present. So as I said, if you want to see more about what I mean with this, you can look at the speaker notes. So I told you I would speak up. So we need to define our terms, Muse and tool. I'm going to do that quickly because really at the core, everybody knows what a Muse is and everybody knows what a tool is. But we need to say what we mean. So a Muse is a source of inspiration. There's, of course, a history of humans interacting with muses, in their minds at least, that goes back a long way. I'm pretty ignorant of that history. I really just picked that out. It may even be that AI gave me the idea to call it a muse. That's possible, because I don't think about muses a lot in my daily life. Yeah. But one of the great things about muses and similar concept is that everybody gets it, even though nobody ever met one in person. That's kind of peculiar. And why? Because everybody gets the difference between being touched by something in your mind, in your heart, versus touching something. That's the tool. You touch something versus being touched. Yeah? And that's the muse. So there is no research without imagination. So whatever you may find, you will find a muse somewhere in there. The question is, can you find it in the AI? So tool is easier. It's an instrument of execution. It's also a very old concept. And unlike the muse, as I said, you can see it, you can touch it, you can use it. You may not be able to use a muse, but you can always learn to use a tool, even badly. Yeah? So computers and machines, of course, are tools, analog or digital. It doesn't matter. They follow instructions. And when there are no instructions or nonsensical instructions, the machine stops working. That's the main difference between a tool and a muse. When things don't make sense, the muse will actually help you. Yeah? And of course, when you don't know where you're going, because you want your imagination to spark, you will go to the muse, not to the tool. Because you look at the tools, you don't know what to do with them. Yeah? So now a little bit of, because that sounds so clean and clear, but what you should say maybe is that most of the ideas that you have in the early space stage of research are not original. Perhaps yours are, but mine are not. And I think it's a fair guess that many people come up with similar ideas when you come up with an idea. And because of the lamentable but unavoidable specialization of researchers that I talked to you about earlier, most research is duplication because we just don't know that it's already been done. Yeah? The more complicated it becomes, the more relevant to know that this has already been done because it's a spearhead rather than anything, the least likely is it that we will find out about it, except in our own field. Yeah? So, and some of it, of course, is fraudulent too. So it's not just not original, but it's a fake. Now, I don't want to name any names, in particular not medicine, but in some areas this amount of fraudulent research is reported to be in the double digits. Yeah. So now I did name a name. I didn't want to do that. So one of the things that AI might be able to do, of course, is help you do a literature review to find out how original you are. Except it's not, because A, there are hallucinations, and even if you leave the hallucinations aside, which you can easily spot, does the reference exist or not, you don't know if your literature review is complete. Just like in Google search, it's no improvement whatsoever on Google search. It's actually worse, because not only don't you know the algorithm, you could find out if you had a buddy at Google, but you can't even look inside. You will never know what the algorithm is or why the AI came up with that reference and not with that other reference. Yeah? So that's not very good. But it is something that people should nevertheless try, just like they should do Google search. Why not? Yeah? Now, here's my Muse use, pun intended, of AI. In my case, and that looks really, it makes me sad when I look at it, I used AI to keep myself motivated, clarify my thoughts, polish the presentation of my thoughts, and implement, that's what's really important, small sample cases. But the way I worked this was, I was already a watchmaker, yeah, who doesn't open a watch and like, oh, that's a watch. I was already doing kind of detailed, fine work, very minute work. And for that, it was very good, but not really for the broad strokes. So I asked the students the same question I asked you. I'm going to show you the results in a moment. What they thought. And interesting, the students thought 47% looked at AI as a muse and 53% as a tool. That surprised me, I have to say. What surprised me even more, and this is a small sample, I think 18 or so in my classes, how sophisticated and incredibly discerning and touchingly honest the answers were. So I asked for open, tell me openly how you use it, why you don't use it. And what they wrote was amazing, amazing. Yeah? So that makes me feel very positive because it means they understand. They don't go, blindly into that dark night. Yeah? So at this point, I hope I can make this work, have a look at I'm sure you're curious to see what came out. Opening poll. 49 responses. Good grief. Statistics. Okay, when it comes to research, that's interesting. Can you see it? Is it big enough? 49%, both equally, 38% tool does a job, and then some split. Now, the second one is the Bill Gates thing. This is only, I think, a week ago. No, not a week ago, but a couple of weeks ago. And most of you strongly disagree, but some people do agree. Some people strongly agree, some somewhat agree. So that's interesting, lots to milk here. I thought it was useful. If you don't ask people a survey without giving them the results. We don't have time to go into it, but I think it's interesting that my question was not a yes/no question. I gave you a way out in a way, so as to to offer you to establish your ambivalence. And it looks like there is a lot of ambivalence, at least. Yeah. So let me get back. So we did the results. Let's look at the cognitive map. I'm going to do this really quickly because, again, just like in the case of the Muse, I can work with some things that you already know. So as I said, after spring break, I decided it was time to give myself such an overview of how to use AI. And this is the result. It's not fully articulated. And I told you I was in a scenario team. So this method I used, which was scenario building, can be milked, but it has to be milked over years. So at Shell, the company I worked with scenarios, we create scenarios. And then for 2 years, the scenarios are slowly refined with a lot of data taking, a lot of data analysis. So this is just the first sort of idea of how these scenarios could look like. Yeah? Basically, it's 4 scenarios in each of the quadrants. There's an idea and a result, from idea to result, and Muse and tool. So this is like a coordinate system. At the center, if you want, you can look at review. So the ground zero of research is review, finding out, what did other people think already. And you can read what it does. It's a good thing to have scenarios just to orient yourself. Which world are we living in right now? And so so I don't have to make too much explanation because we are to the end. I picked, hopefully, shared cultural ground, which is fairy tales. Everybody knows these fairy tales. So if you're in the upper left, you're like in the Frog Prince world. On the right, you are in Rapunzel. Lower right, you are Rumpelstiltskin, and lower left, you are Hansel and Gretel. That's really what it is. It sounds almost trivial, right? But it's kind of interesting. The Frog Prince. That means you can use the Muse part of AI in the ideas phase to reveal the unexpected. That does actually happen. Because you're not complete and you tap into a lot of actual knowledge, and something will come back that will tell you, wow, I didn't actually expect that. Rapunzel is you work with the Muse in the results area, so at the end, and it can actually unlock some new ideas. So an example would be, I think, when you test the results in sample cases, right? You have results, and you ask the Muse to test it. Or, for example, another example, not tool-wise, would be I didn't do it, but I wish I had. Give a difficult demonstration or presentation you have never done. Just bombard me with all the possible most difficult questions that anybody in the audience could say. And the audience comes from philosophy, biology, chemistry, all these areas. Yeah? That should be this. This is in the idea tool case, much simpler. Anything with tools is much simpler. It's like Hansel and Gretel, trying to find your path, right? So you use the AI in order to identify, for example, where to go next. Yeah? And then the last one is Rumpelstiltskin. Now that's, of course, one of the most dangerous fairy tales. I never understood it, always feared it. Probably I'm not the only one who had nightmares from Rumpelstiltskin. But this is like finding different ways to present results. Let's say I presented not this way. In fact, I had another one. I'd made up this completely different framework about from idea to result, which would have required a lot of explanation. And if I hadn't tried that, but if I had asked the AI, could I improve this, it probably would have said, well, can you work with something that the people already know? And so I took idea and result. That's useful. So that's the map. Don't want to say more about it. I think it might be useful, but it has to be explored, like every map. Yeah? So I'm almost done. A little bit of early evidence in these areas. I'm not going to refer this. The early evidence is really just to assure you, and you can read it in the speaker's notes. They're pretty complete. I have them here in front of me. That all of what I've said can be backed up. Okay, there's early evidence from student research that a lot of the students, just like our students, use generative AI for research. The numbers in some cases are staggeringly high, up more than 90%. And I think our numbers here from our surveys confirm that. There's a very interesting lecture for mathematicians by Terence Tao. He's one of the foremost mathematicians in the world, who talked about the potential of AI in science and mathematics. And many of both the positive and the negative aspects you will hear in his lecture. I recommend it very strongly. In humanities research, the stance is more divided. So in coding, everybody runs towards the AI exit. In the humanities, people are standoffish. Maybe because they know more about humans and machines, I don't know. But there's lots of confirmations of that. And general public use as well. This is a 2024 report, which says that 70% of the teenagers have used generative AI tools. This is early in 2024. So these numbers are just very, very high. Now, a little bit about the tools themselves. most of these should be known. I've talked about multimodal models already. The top thing at the top is multi-context prompting. That's a fancy word for, now I remember what we talked about last year. That's what it is. More context based on your conversations. Not a new model, not a new brain, but it's like, I remember what you wore last time I met you, kind of thing. Could be highly misleading, but it definitely adds to the depth of the conversation. Agents is the latest thing. Probably the hype of agents is probably only not more than 2 weeks ago, which basically means that you take the model and you give it control over external devices, your browser, your computer, or other devices, and you let it work with that according to your rules. And so basically it can take mundane jobs that you would do with your browser, with your computer, whatever, and work them. It doesn't work very well with the physical world, but none of this stuff works with the physical world. So when it gets real in the hard sense, these tools mostly do stop working. And I mean, they just stop working. Yeah? Language model notebooks is something I use with my students in class. That is something I can recommend. This is basically making a sandbox and not allow the model to look outside the box. So for example, I would ask them, make a literature review, and if you don't upload any documents to this notebook LM, the answer is, I know nothing. You upload a source, now I know something. So the response is directly in proportion to what you have fed to the model. And that's useful for the students. So they do their literature reviews now a little happier than they used to do it, which was very unhappy. Domain-specialized copilots, actually there is one called Copilot, which is for coding. Certain areas have now additional copilots. I don't know too much about other areas than coding, but it's very rampant there. Talked about the multimodal models. And the next thing, of course, is edge AI and local AI. Now, a local AI in this case would be a self-driving car, but it would also be a drone that has a grenade on top and that's been left out and to completely independently and autonomously find its target and do whatever. If that grenade drone hallucination, things don't look so well. So that's the next frontier for these models. Sorry to end on a negative note. Some predictions. So I think that the scientific publication volume will increase enormously. I think order of magnitude is not too short, but at the same time, the trust in the value of these publications will decline rapidly. That's already happening. Much more in STEM than in humanities, because people have, the research is different, the reading is different, the way of interacting with research is different. Many of productivity increases, I think, will be debunked just because of measurement errors. I mentioned the example, benefits analysis, right? You have to identify what is the benefit, to whom? Who did I ask? Did I get the benefit as 100%, but asking people who won't benefit from the benefit at all? That's very common. Yeah. So then many of these benefits will be erased because there's a lot of strife and struggle with AI. And I've only told you about it, but I think you experience it yourself. The very moment you want something, really now, fast, and it doesn't deliver it. Yeah. So at the same time, and this is the good news, the value of the human brain will become much more apparent. That's great news. We have new ways of information sharing that also will emerge if the old ones don't work, and I've told you I don't think they really work. I think the flood of fraudulent pointers publication will recede simply because we have to change the business model of publishing. Yeah? And a different business model or a different model of proceeding has the chance to start all over. It's like a baptism. Yeah? So, and AI I don't think will kill the host, but it will make it stronger. That's my prediction. It's very optimistic. Conclusions, don't rely on generative AI. That's the answer to my question. For lack of resources, I think it can unlock some research momentum. I've experienced that myself, but not meaning. And the gains are pretty real, but they are fragile, they are uneven, and very easily misinterpreted as something that they're not. Great thanks to the college for a research grant last summer. Thank you very much. To my collaborators in these talks, Christian Del Gobbo, Nikki Jons, Wesley Beal, myself. And colleagues who have been sort of on this particular AI journey, and of course all my students and the entire IT department. That's it. Hours later, the AI is still trying to be funny. And this was the answer. Thank you. Token question or real question? Any questions? Yes, James.
Well, first, thanks so much for this. This was fantastic. I really enjoyed it.
You're welcome.
And I love the philosophical references more than the computational parts.
I'm sorry for you.
I have many questions.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw you one right now. But I was wondering if you could talk more about the hallucination aspect in terms of, like, we think in general, common idea of what is hallucination, right? It's a perception that is not real, right?
Yeah.
But it provokes, it appears, it provokes desire, strife, fear, anxiety, and so on, right?
Yeah.
And it seems that one of the reactions or the things that drive people to use AI, precisely what you mentioned, is trust.
Yeah.
Right? Like AI is an embodiment of wisdom.
Yeah.
It's not gonna.
So why wouldn't I trust it? Yeah.
Why would I trust
Yeah.
it? Right? And that's kind of the risky part.
Yeah.
So, really quickly, I was trying to do, funny enough, illustrations of Taylor's cavern through AI, with ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And I've been playing with it to try to make it create images that are a little disturbing in some way, that it's gonna, like, but I have to bypass kind of the moral code of like, oh.
So go dark, basically, go dark.
The thing is, like, when you try to do that, what it will do is go heavy metal cover, dark, right? it goes cliche, right? It's like, I want something, it will show you skulls and flames, and you're like, no, like, so it reproduces the cliches that we have, because you say, like, it's just, like, fitting itself with the information it has, right? It doesn't create things. Yet, the emotional part, like the hallucination part, involves things that go underneath our like reasoning process, right? Like what Freud calls the unconscious, right? So could you talk more about how do you guys define in your field those hallucinations, and what do you think that has relates to our own emotional reaction to hallucinations and let's say, empirical perception? I know it's a little.
That's a really difficult question. First of all, about the first part, I can easily answer, no idea. The reason why I wanted to do this research is because I was intrigued by that. And I think that to have such a almost defining quality of such a tool that people cannot figure out seems nonsense. Yeah. So that's why I was interested in it. But at the same time, you saw the instruments I was trying to wield. I don't just wield these instruments because I can use them. That's always a good reason. But a better reason is because I feel that you need them. You know, you actually, to open this black box up, you need some special instruments. So I have no idea. I cannot say more about hallucinations other than, and most of the publications are really, for a mathematician and a computer scientist, deeply disturbingly trivial. Because they're really just like, we don't know what to do. We have this giant machine. There's 500 buttons. Let's figure out a method to twiddle with most of the buttons and record what happens. That's deeply unsystematic and frustrating. It's called hyperparameter tuning. So it has, a lot of words attached to it. But it's anyway. The second part, like, you're wondering about what's the feedback, the resonance between the hallucinations of the machine and the humans who perceive them. Is that your question?
Yeah, in the sense, like, just to clarify really quick, right? Like, you mentioned, like, some examples, I think you were kind of, like, footnoting them, where AI has reproduced some of the worst drives of our speeches, right? Like, there was a famous one where it went neo-Nazi, like, in 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Like, so when it's reproducing or utilizing our discourses, it also is going to reproduce our ghosts and our worst drives, right?
Yes.
So my question was really in what do you, and you already answered it, like, what do you mean by hallucination? Is it just mistakes, right? And how does that relate to when you are, if, to go back to your metaphor, if it tells me, oh, you don't need to read Marx Das Kapital, you already know it means this, right? Like, it just reproduces this cliche misinformation that is just gonna, like, how do you make it stop? I don't know, like, I'm just, like, curious about that.
How can you, for example, are you asking, like, how could you get the AI in this conversation to be a little more honest about what you really know and what the machine gives you? Like that? Because what I think here is this is not something the machine can solve. This is down to the human. It's the human who betrays himself. It's not the machine who betrays you. The machine is trying to do its best. you know, it's the machine. Sorry, it's the human that does it, not the machine. Yeah.
I think you're
But
right.
I was wondering, of course, you know, you already Plato's cave. Isn't Plato's cave dark enough for you? It's a cave.
Well, sorry, but this is the last thing. I was gonna say one thing about the periscope that you mentioned that you didn't mention that's interesting is the shadows are not made by the light of the sun. The shadows are made by humans.
That's
who are
right, by
walking
people.
behind.
That's why in my image I have a robot carry the
yeah.
objects. Yeah, that's true. Sorry, not Sandy.
So in terms of trust, why does AI always return an answer? Why doesn't it ever say, I don't know, or give some type of value to say?
Well, you could make it that way.
So, so why can't you essentially give some type of quantitative value to say, based on the LLM, I have high confidence in this, because it's giving you the best answer out of the training data. But can you ask it to also to determine the likelihood of, or how much information that is being pulled from the learning model?
It could totally give you, and you can get that easily enough in the sandbox, the probabilities for the individual potential choices. That's not hard to get to. It can also tell you the added probabilities if you take the training data, patterns in the old data, plus the context that is new, maybe web searches and so on. That's more probabilities. And you could totally attach to that. You could, there's more than one parameter, but one of the parameters is the temperature. You can almost like think of it in terms of temperature. You can freeze the model and make it less bouncy, right? And make it much more real and serious, just by lowering the temperature in a way. And you can do that. And then you get a model that basically, will admit, I mean, I'm improvising a little, but will basically admit not to know anything. You could do that. Yeah. And it may be actually, that's maybe an idea there, to actually say, we need different models. Sorry.
Going to say, for sake of keeping us on time, let's give Dr. Birkenkrahe a hand.